There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them. Hey, here we are again. Dave Coplin here, bringing you another Future of Work podcast, dialing into the future of work. This week, cracking show. We're back in home turf, in fact. We're back in the IT department. This has been a story that we've been telling for the best part of 30 years. You'll remember us. We're the long-haired, beardy people, mostly, and there are occasionally people of the other gender in this career, although we need more of them, frankly. And for the last 30 years, we've been looking after your computers. We've been keeping your networks safe. We've been making sure you've got all the bits and bobs you need, because 30 years ago, quite frankly, we were the people that you needed most, because you didn't have technology at home. You didn't have a smartphone in your pocket. You didn't have a PC. You probably didn't have it even at school or college. And so you needed me and my nerd friends because we frankly sacrificed our social lives so that we would understand how they worked. And we spent our time with you, and we helped you with the business, use technology to get to do all of the wonderful things that you do and now love. And there we stayed for too long, really, and we continued to exist in this world where we still thought we were the only people on the planet who frankly not only knew about how technology worked but actually cared how it worked. And what we missed for the most part is the fact that you all now have a richer experience of technology in your personal lives than we allow you to at work. And slowly this friction has emerged, and we're all used to computer says no, but this world where the IT guys are the people who say no, and that's frankly a bit wrong. So we have to fix that. The pandemic has proved that. So we thought, wouldn't it be good, let's get a bunch of people on the show. We've all got background in IT, talking about what is the real opportunity for the IT department going forward. So on that note, let me introduce you to our fabulous panel. We have, as ever, the wonderful Gary Burt. How are you doing, Gary?
I'm good, Dave. How are you?
Fantastic. Glad we could get you on. And new camera, Gary, as well. You're looking sharp, my friend. Long may that last. Long in the coming as well. It's been weeks we've been waiting for that. And
you've got it working.
Yeah, good. Anyway, shut up. We've got somebody more important than you, and more frankly more interesting. We've got Matt Ballantine. yeah. So Matt is, I called him today an industry veteran, which I'm now finding out is code for something else, but I didn't mean it in that way. I just mean he's a smart guy. He's been around a while, take that the right way, and knows his onions. He also runs a really brilliant podcast called WB40. So how you doing, Matt? Thanks for joining us.
I'm very well. Nice to see you, Dave. Yeah, the industry veteran thing, and then you said seasoned as well, which is like, it's a series of adjectives that basically mean you're running to the end of your career, doesn't it? That's what it basically is, all coded language.
I was just trying to put it as gently as I could, but frankly, all three of us have seen better days. But that actually is important because it means we've got experience. And I actually, look, I sort of opened here, and this is where I wanted to start the conversation. When I started my career in the IT department 30 odd years ago, it was a world where computers were only just beginning to be introduced. And, literally you did need nerds like us because we were the only people who could figure out how to plumb them together to do the stuff that you needed so that you could do amazing things in the business. And I actually think the fact that we were there at the beginning is quite rich and important right now, because it is the people who've been around for too long who can see the problems in people who are over-managing, let's call it over-managing IT. So that's my excuse for being old. Does that work for you guys?
It works.
Well, I remember when, corporate IT was the place where the cool kit was. That's where the new stuff was. If you're in IT, you saw the new stuff first. Where we are today, you see the new stuff last. You're fighting the IT department. They would never want you to get your hands on the cool stuff.
I do remember, and this is a global accounting firm, I'll have you know. We had one machine in the building that had internet access, and we used to queue up to use it. So that's where we were. That's where we started. So look, let's talk to the problem statement. And I guess, Matt, I'm going to go over to you in a second. But my proposition to you guys is that I would imagine that the organizations that have fared best in the terrible consequence of the pandemic, not just from a health perspective, but from a economic and productive perspective, were the organizations that had IT at the heart of their business. So were able to strategically manage IT. And unfortunately, that's not all of the organizations, right? So that was a new thing for some of the organizations. So my question for you, Matt, is do you think that's a fair proposition? B, what happens now as we come out of the pandemic? Does that position go back to normal?
I don't think it's necessarily that it's those that have strategically run IT. I think that one of the changing points, I think, for technology in business over the last 15 years or so, in fact, most of the time I've been working for the last 25 years, but particularly from the late 90s onwards, was the view of whether technology is a cost to be managed or investment to be able to drive revenue or better service or whatever else. And I think that the organisations probably that will have done better out of the last 9 months, or at least had not as traumatic experience, will be those that haven't been so obsessed with the idea that technology is merely a cost to be managed out. So those organisations that decided that thin client and thin client devices were a more sensible approach than giving everybody a laptop is a classic case of that.
Yeah, I really like that, Matt, because there's another angle, and I'm not sure we should get into it now, but maybe later. There's another good indicator for me is when the IT director reports into the CFO. It is always a warning flag to me because it just says, oh, it's another number to be managed rather than either. I'd rather see them at the board level or the sort of the exec level or even somewhere closer to the business. What about you, Gary? Sort of what are the telltale signs for you that we've seen in terms of managing IT in the pandemic?
Well, I mean, the worst thing you could ever say about the IT department is it's the department of no. I think when we started, if we go back to the days when we started, people were coming in and the IT guys were the experts in how to use technology. They were the experts and they guarded that very carefully. And, they slowly drip fed their skills into the business and kept it safe. Where we are now, this is completely reversed. The skills in IT are going to be much more with the people using the IT. And I don't mean that the skills of the administrator are diminished. They're not, but they've changed. So whereas we had, we go back to 30 years ago, we go back and the IT guy was the expert on Excel. He knew how to use Word. He was the expert on, how to connect it, how to get wireless working. And we're starting to see, 20, 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, the very first emergence of using data seriously remotely. Well, if we look at people coming into the business now, we're looking at hiring creative people. So those people who are coming in, they're going to be the experts in using Photoshop, in using editing apps, in creating content. The IT guys are going to they're going to know how to protect it. They're going to know how to install the applications, but they are not the experts in using those applications. So I think what we've got to do is recognize that the role of IT has changed. It's not simply an enabling function. It's actually it's moved from being a do everything function to an enable and get out of the way function. That's what needs to happen. What do we want from IT? We want to enable the organization to do its best and actually just to stay on the outside and keep us safe and maybe stop people doing stupid things. But it's everything else. The default should be to get out of the way.
So, wow. Okay. So look, there's three things there. And I'm going to end my little bit here because I want to bring Matt in because I know you've got a sort of a conversation about the human skills of IT. But before we get there, to me, it just reminds me of, do you remember the early days of IT security, right? And these were the days where we were the sort of long-haired freethinkers about, well, you can do anything with technology. And then you'd always get some bugger from security who's they would be literally the guys of no. And I remember a certain point in my career, for a penance, they made me share an office with our head of IT security. He was a lovely guy, but he was an IT security guy, right? So his definition of a good computer is one that's switched off, locked in a box with all the plugs cut off, right? And mine is another one, which is sort of in the open open foyer with all of the ports open. Just fill your boots, man. It's like, well, anything you want, we can do it here. And of course, the answer is somewhere in between. Now, him, the bugger, him and all of the IT security guys, they learned a lesson long before we did, which was the answer is never no. It's yes, but. So in a world of, we need to do wireless networking, right? And if you said no, literally, whoever was in the business asking the question would just say, well, sod you, I'm going to go and buy it anyway, I'm going to do it. So his answer was always, yes, but if you're going to do it, here's how I'd like you to do it. And we in IT, we never learned that lesson. We forgot to be enablers. And I know there'll be lots of people in the audience who are great IT directors and are, at the core of their business. But for my money, there are still far too many people who are locked into that, managing cost, managing risk, thinking only of the technology rather than what it enables in the business. And so then to your point about getting out of the way, I think any sort of service inside the organization has to add value. And if you can't add value, then to your point, get out of the way. And then thirdly and finally, and Matt, this is where I'd really love to hear your perspective, because I know you've got a lot of insight on this. I think the days of plumbing the technology together are kind of long gone. For the most part, lots of people are doing it themselves and they don't really think it's that special. And I know there's a world of difference between connecting a printer and creating a new API on some cloud service somewhere. But in many cases, people are doing that. But it's this human side. It's the helping people, use it effectively, helping people understand their problems that I think is kind of the future of IT. Do you remember we used to have business analysts in the IT department? These were people who could talk human language to humans, like there are other things to talk to. I don't know. But where are they? So Matt, talk us through about your perspective from the sort of the human side of this. How do we manage through it?
So I think we need to be careful. Some of the things you said there about, it shouldn't be just about managing risk. It shouldn't be just about managing the numbers. You've got to do that. You can't give a free for all within the constraints of an organisation. And I think there's a bit of a myth there that users now, people in organisations who aren't technology people are super skilled and they know what they're doing, because they don't. They know what they're doing from the context of their position. And if you allow that to just have complete free reign, what inevitably you will end up with is what we ended up with in the early stages of computing, which is a set of systems that perfectly map to the organization's structure and replicate. And what could it get even worse is it will replicate down to the individual person level. Everybody will have their own set of systems and they'll be using something different and none of it will interoperate. And within the context of a large organization, of any sort of organization, there is a need to be able to provide consistency and standards and a limited way of doing things, and to restrict the amount of stuff that you do, because every single bit of failed legacy has long-term cost. Every bit of it does. But where I think the failing is that it's not about an engineering discipline then. It's a much more nuanced thing. And this is where I think IT is very different from computer science. Computer science is engineering. It's about how do you take problem and be able to use code and stuff to be able to answer problem. The management of IT is a political act. It's a sociological act. It's a psychological act. There's a little bit of engineering in there, but these days the engineering is increasingly irrelevant unless you take things like data. But data is itself actually, it's a good data modeling practice that seems to have been forgotten by most organizations, is an exercise in semantic understanding. It's philosophy. It's not bloody engineering. And that's where this starts to fall over, because if you are in a position, I'm 9 months into a role now as head of technology for a relatively small social enterprise. I've inherited a lot of siloed systems and everybody's saying we need to do this now. And my 9 months has been so far building up my credibility to get to a point where I can say, we have to work together here, people, and we have to do it in a way that is going to meet all of our needs enough, rather than trying to meet some of our needs independently, totally, which will be, it's a prisoner's dilemma thing.
Yeah.
There's a psychological thing where two prisoners, they're told if you snitch on the other, you'll get released for free. If you're snitched on, you will get 10 years. If you keep quiet, you'll get 2 years. And the sensible route is to not snitch on the other.
Yeah.
because then everybody ends up in the best position. You don't end up with ideally what you want, and that's what the art of IT management should be about. But either, I think some people are like that, but some people are in the realm of, I'm going to tell everybody what to do, and others are in the realm of, I will be a passive order taker.
Yeah.
And you've got to be somewhere in between that.
It sounds to me, though, and I guess this would be another interesting question for you, Matt, and Gary. I mean, you'll see this from your organisation too. Is what there never used to be from the business was some empathy about, actually it isn't quite as simple as just installing Dropbox on your machine, because we've got things like GDPR to worry about and all that sort of stuff. And in the old days, there would have been a strop and they would have walked out of the room and gone and done it anyway. These days, as people are a bit more technologically aware and have greater experience elsewhere, do you think there's a greater degree of empathy coming from those asks, or is it still very much sort of focused?
I think the best IT departments, the one skill that they have is communication. They're communicating. And what they're doing is they're opening a dialogue. So they're not saying no. What they're saying is, as you said, yes, but. And what they're doing, when I say they're communicating well, what they're doing is they're saying, you want this to happen. So we go to the IT department. I want Dropbox, okay? And I can install it, and okay, you can lock me down, but I can do this on my own computer. The best IT departments, like you say, are not saying no. They're saying, okay, you want to have this capability. The challenge I've got with that is that I have this responsibility to guarantee data security and ensure perhaps data sovereignty. So help me understand how we can do this together. So the best IT departments that I've seen are able to have that dialogue and find a solution rather than simply say no. They have, as you said, empathy with the user, but they are focused on finding a solution to that in a way that's acceptable. And actually, the right answer is always going to be some form of compromise. But I think if we look at what's happened during if you want to see whether your IT department is great or not, look back over the last 4 months and see what did they change to enable the business? How did they evolve to change the business? Did they continue to do the things they were doing, or did they evolve? Did they start to become proactive about helping organizations improve the quality of their remote networking? Did they make it easier? Are they helping organizations? Are they helping departments work in a distributed and remote way if they weren't already? So I think this is, seeing, as you said before, seeing IT departments as as a part of the organization that should be actively contributing, not being a passive department that sits as a cost center. Yes, they have to manage this, but if you wanted to go, it's like any job. If you wanted to do a good job, understand what your users want to do, understand what your customers want to do, and help them do it. So if you're an IT department and you don't know what your users want to do, you're failing. But to be honest, you'd be failing in any other business. Understand what it is your customers, the users want to do, and then look at how you can start to help that, not block that. And that might mean.
Go on, Matt.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, there's another element as well. A good few years ago, I posited the idea of the department or the platforms for working. The idea that you should have a chief working officer, somebody who had responsible for all of the services that were necessary for an organisation to do its work, and that should be separate from the parts of the organisation which were delivering what it is for customers. And within that model, I had this idea of the minimum viable workplace, which would basically be some network, a device, some space, coffee. And basically the minimum viable workplace these days is a Starbucks, or was up until recently.
Yeah.
To be able to organise that on current structures, what you'd find is that you'd have the CIO providing some elements of the network in the coffee shop. The facilities team would provide the chairs and stuff. They'd outsource the catering. The coffee would be god awful, and HR wouldn't know what to do about it because it didn't form, standard thing. And actually, that's basically the same as most meeting spaces, which are again in physical offices where these different functions who don't work together effectively come together and show how they're not working together. And so within that, then the idea was, well, you should have the chain of command, because organizations are inevitably hierarchical at a certain scale, should lead to somebody who has responsible for all of those support functions. It's one of the things that attracted me to my role now, that my manager, executive director for people and business services, and she looks after all of the support functions with the exception of finance.
Yeah.
And so I work in the same organisational unit as HR, as facilities, as training, as health and safety. And that means that we can have the opportunity to be able to work together to deliver the service. Because it's not just about the IT, it's not just about any of these things in isolation. And again, that way of thinking about collaboratively, what are the alliances that we need to form within organisations to effectively deliver the platforms that are necessary for an organisation to operate. It certainly doesn't come from sticking IT directly under finance.
No, and what I think is really interesting in what you're talking about there, Matt, is this sort of concept of employee experience. And I know, Nick Morris, who's often on the show, he's sort of big on this as well, is we spend so long thinking about our customer experience and customer journeys. Actually, we should be spending an equal amount of time thinking about our employee experience and employee journeys. And that to me kind of feels like the next chapter of what it means to be in IT. And I use the term really loosely because it isn't about fixing printers or changing toner cartridges, but is instead saying, how do we provide these services? So do you think that experience piece probably becomes part of the core of what IT needs to become?
Yes, but not in the kind of way that some organisations think about employee experience as a metric to be measured.
Yeah, okay.
And ultimately, in the same way with customer service, customer experience, you shouldn't think about how you do customer service training for customer service agents, but still the underlying service is crap. Every telecoms company, right?
Yeah.
If your underlying service is crap, you will not have good customer experience. And similarly, if the general experience of work is crap, you will not have good employee experience. And by that, I mean, actually, it starts with, have people got fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful work? So yes, I think that it definitely does have an effect on that. But then you need to think about, well, how is the technology enabling people to be able to have more purposeful, meaningful work? Not how do we make sure that we have, we're doing stuff on the side. We're providing an employee portal to enable them to be able to do solitaire when they're not working, or whatever it is that you think is going to be, leading to better engagement. It's got to be, the work needs to be the engaging thing.
Yeah.
Technology can act as a barrier to that, though, for sure.
No, definitely. So, Gary, where does IT belong in an organisation from a sort of hierarchy perspective? What's the ideal place for it?
I like what Matt said. I like the idea that it's seen as part of, the joined up employee experience. I think the main thing with IT is we need to recognize, particularly with the shifts we've seen over the last few months, that for almost all organizations, IT is an essential part of the business now. But I think what we need to do is we need to see it as very close to HR, but a way of it's an enabling, it's a productivity department. It's a department that when it's done well, it helps people achieve more. That's the function we need to be seeing it as. Yeah, there's a protect function. But when it's done well, it's allowing the organization to do a lot more than it would without them. And that's what we need to be looking at. I think there's one other thing that we often, going back to what we started with, another thing is that we need to be, as we've seen the changing environment, we need to be shifting the spending patterns as well. If you're seeing the department as a cost, you're not going to be seeing it as a way of enabling the organization. So I wonder how many organizations are looking at the moment and going, you know what, we're saving on office costs. Let's put that into our IT costs. Let's look at how we can let's look at not giving people crap laptops. Let's look at how we give people great webcams, really good home office equipment. So what they are is this is really A-grade productivity support we're giving them. Instead of giving them some crap app, we're going to give them some really good subscription to a creative tool. Actually, what we're going to give them is support for learning. And I don't mean crap corporate training. I mean, if you're interested in starting to learn about Photoshop, we'll get you a Photoshop subscription, not a 6-month, please beg, please can I possibly have it? Oh, sod it, I'll buy it myself as a student using one of the kids' vouchers for, from uni login accounts. We need to be rethinking this and going, and moving it to proactive conversation of saying, there's a shift here. It is the department of personal productivity. That's what the IT department should be. Yes, they've got to manage the protection of the data. They've got to manage the compliance around the information that's stored. But ultimately, it should be, if I'm working remotely, how can I get the most out of my time? And that, we talked about it as the department of no, and which is the getting out of the way job. But actually, when it's done really well, it's a very different experience. It's not having to beg 4 years down the line because your laptop is ridiculously slow. You're contacted proactively, like, hang on, we recognize those issues. Let's get you a new laptop. Because the ironic thing is, as we've seen the shifts, the cost of IT as a percentage of people's salaries, a personal IT is dropping quickly. It's not rising. The relative cost of a decent laptop is coming down, but we're not making those shifts.
So look, I love all of that, and I love what you said, Matt. So I want to talk about two things. Just in the final sort of 5 minutes of the show, I want to talk about skills in terms of what do we think make the core of IT skills now. In the old days, it might have been things like netware and God, I was trying to think, what was Apple Talk? Bloody hell, Jesus Christ! There we go, show my age. And then the final things I want to talk about leadership and what leaders need to be doing. So let's talk about skills. So a really lovely stat this week that said, I think it was something in 2018, there are 7.3 million vacancies for IT related positions. This is US numbers, but you can guarantee that it'll be same in the UK. And what I loved in particular about that was that over 50% of those 7.3 million jobs didn't require a degree. So they were looking for, just great skills. And I think, look at what we've been going through with schools recently in terms of their relationship with technology. And I'm working with a number of different initiatives, but one in particular in Coventry, which is about how do we give schools the confidence to do innovative and important things with technology. And there's an apprenticeship program. So if you think about, if I'm at apprenticeship level or I'm starting out my career in IT, what do you think are the core skills that will serve me best of all, Matt?
So there are three things, and I don't think these get enough focus at all at the moment within technology teams. The first is empathy and the ability to understand the other and understand the needs of the other. The second is curiosity and wanting to find out about, to some extent, technology, but also actually to be passionate about understanding how the organization operates. And the third is humility, and that's the ability to be absolutely open to say, I don't know, but let's try and find out. And that those three things together are how we lead to be able to design services that enable people to be able to work more effectively.
Love that.
I don't see those kind of skills being majored on, particularly in most technology roles. I think the other thing is just to think about the types of technology that we have. The traditions of business systems have been around transactional technologies. Yeah. And I think that the engineering discipline is pretty good at managing transactional services because transactional services lend themselves towards production line, tailorist kind of thinking. The emergence in the last 30 years has been not of those sort of transactional services. It's been about services that are around interaction. And they're far less structured and they're far messier and they're far less easy to be able to comprehend once you've got the system up and running. And so from a technology management in an organization perspective, they're really hard for people who are used to running ERP systems to get their head around what does something like Miro, the whiteboarding tool, mean. Yeah. And what does a social network mean? And so one of the things, as you've both been talking, I do wonder is actually, is there a natural split there between transactional IT services and interactional IT services that would be better served by splitting out into two different areas?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot. Because it's not like this sort of, and I sort of it's a bit clickbaity, but for me it's this sort of thing as IT guys as plumbers or Pathfinders, and there's always going to be plumbing, right? So we're going to need a bit of that, but actually it's looking at those two very different things. So let me go to the close. I want to come to both of you on this. So my feeling is that right now there are a bunch of IT directors who are, let's just say, buried in the organization, who have been the heroes to a certain extent of helping the organization get through the pandemic, making sure everybody transitions to Teams or Zoom overnight. They've got the stuff going up, done really well. And they've got this opportunity now where the business has recognized the value that they offer. I'd love your one bit of advice that you could give those people for how they could punch through the organization and make that last. So really drive home their strategic relevance to the organization. Gary, let's start with you.
I love what just for answer that, I love what Matt was saying about that human side. I guess I was thinking about this as you were saying. I see this as three levels. We talked about mentioned Maslow and Taylor in thinking before. I see this as three levels. One, and three levels of maturity. At the first, you've got a level of personal competence. At the second one, you've got a level of collaborative competence, and the third one, creative competence. And I think you need to see these three on top of each other. So your first one to do, I guess, simply to wrap up, first one, make sure what you've got is working and is it personally enabling. Second one, make sure what you've got is working. Is it personally enabling, but is collaboratively enabling? And then the third one, once you've got the organization talking together, it's working, it's functional. The third one is then to look at how do you make it creative on top of that? How do you provide the tools for creative collaboration? So, get the basics right, get the collaboration right, and then look at how you enable that creative collaboration. So one piece of advice for IT directors is really simple. Ask your users, how can we help? They'll know. And if they don't, their kids will. So, ask people how you can help. Change that dialogue.
Yeah.
And the I guess one other thing is, even if you are working to the finance director, go and bat for your users. Go, hang on, have you seen my budget? We've been cut. Don't you know what's happening in the world? Okay, go, hang on, I'm gonna bat for you. I'm gonna help you make that case. I'm gonna tell you what you need, and I'm gonna go and bat for you and help you make that case.
I really like that last bit, Gary, because I would imagine at the moment users. Fred Warren had a lovely line. The only two industries that talk about users are drug dealers and technology guys, right? But anyway, I would imagine that employees are a lot more vocal about the kind of equipment they need to do a great job than ever before. So I think tapping into that would be a really good thing. Matt, let's go over to you. What's the best advice that you would offer for people trying to sort of last out their strategic resilience or importance in the organization?
So this has been something I've been thinking a lot about myself recently, and rather than thinking about what to do, how to know when you might be succeeding. And for me, I've started to get to a point now where other leaders in the organization are coming to me for a sounding board and to talk things through and advice that isn't about technology. They're asking me to help them think through the organizational challenges that they have, and there's not an expectation that I will have a magic box that will fix it for them. And that's just starting now, and for me that's the sign that I've got the right level of trust. It's the sign that I'm building my reputation. It's that I'm understanding them, that they can see that I can see where they're coming from, and that for me, how do I continue to do things that enable me to be seen as a trusted partner? And that's demonstrated by people coming to me and saying, can I just talk this through with you?
I absolutely love that. And it reminds me of certainly what was my heyday in the IT department, when we were the people that the business would ask to come along, to even go and see the client in terms of what was possible, because you're thinking they're not necessarily of technology, but the outcome, the business outcome that can be driven. So I think that's a great place for us to end. So thanks, Gary. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
Cheers, Dave. Thank you.
I'm going to go into a little bit of housekeeping, if you'll forgive me, and I can remember which button I'm supposed to be pressing. So thank you so much for joining us. That has been a really interesting but brief insight into the world of IT. IT guys are your best friends. You maybe don't know it yet, but you need to go and talk to them and see what they can do for you. As always, there's a few things I'd love to do. First is to thank our sponsors, Treble 3, fantastic in the world of digital print, website design, the whole ball of wax. They are the guys that you need, treble3.co.uk. I will make a plug for an event that's happening on next week, in fact, September the 2nd, and it's an event that we're running with Ingram Micro Cloud. It's about ISVs, but you don't need necessarily to be an ISV if you're interested in how you can drive innovation faster, further, better. It's going to be a really, really great session. I'll put the link for that event in the comments below. As always, we are open to your subscription, to your comments, to your friendship. If there's stuff that you've enjoyed, let us know. Give us a like button. We'd love you to subscribe for more of these if you're interested. If you've got feedback for us, we would love to hear from it. On that note, thank you so much for joining. It's been great to have you. It's been a great conversation. We will see you all again next week. Thanks.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them.